About a family of kids called the Herdmans who didn't know much about Christmas. This is a story of how God touches people with the Christmas message, even people who seem to be untouchable.
We hope our class has been able to demonstrate how God works in real life in the best Christmas pageant ever.
The Herdmans were absolutely the worst kids in the history of the world. They lied and stole and smoked cigars, even the girls, and talked dirty and hit little kids and cussed their teachers and took the name of the Lord in vain and set fire to Fred Shoemaker's old broken-down tool house. The tool house burned right down to the ground, and I think that surprised the Herdmans. They set fire to things all the time, but that was the first time they managed to burn down a whole building.
They were just so all-around awful you could hardly believe they were real. Ralph, Imogene, Leroy, Claude, Ollie, and Gladys. 6 skinny, stringy-haired kids, all alike except for being different sizes and having different black and blue places where they had clonked each other. When it came time for Claude Herdman to pass the 2nd grade, he didn't know his ABCs, or his numbers, or his colors, or his shapes, or his 3 bears, or how to get along with anybody. But Miss Frandl passed him anyway.
For one thing, she knew she'd have Ollie Herdman the next year. That was the thing about the Herdmans. There were always another one coming along, and no teacher was crazy enough to let herself in for 2 of them at once.
I was always in the same grade with Imogene Herdman, and what I did was stay out of her way. It wasn't easy to stay out of her way. You couldn't do it if you were very pretty, very ugly, or very smart, or very dumb, or had anything unusual about you, like red hair or double-jointed thumbs. But if you were sort of a medium kid like me, and kept your mouth shut when the teacher said, "Who can name all 50 states?" you had a pretty good chance to stay clear of Imogene.
As far as anyone could tell, Imogene was just like the rest of the Herdmans. She never learned anything either, except dirty words and secrets about everybody.
My friend Alice Wendelkin was so nasty clean that she had detergent hands by the time she was 4 years old. Just the same, Alice picked up a case of head lice when she was at summer camp, and somehow Imogene found out about that. She would sneak up on Alice at recess and holler, "Cooties, cooties," smack Alice's head. She nearly knocked Alice cross-eyed before one of the teachers saw her and took both of them in to the principal.
She's got cooties in her hair and I don't want them, Mommy. You did not see when I don't have them anymore. What do you mean you don't have them anymore? Did you have them lately? Well...
He sent Alice to the health room, and the nurse went all through her hair with a fine-tooth comb and a magnifying glass, and finally said it was all right, but it was too late. Everyone called Alice Cooties the whole rest of the year.
If Imogene didn't know a secret about a person, she would make one up. She would catch you in the girls' room or out in the hall and whisper, "I know what you did," and then you'd go crazy trying to figure out what it is that you did that Imogene knew about. It was no good trying to get secrets on the Herdmans. Everybody already knew all the awful things they did.
The Herdmans pretty much looked after themselves. Ralph looked after Imogene, Imogene looked after Leroy, and Leroy looked after Claude, and so on down the line. The Herdmans were most like big families. The big ones taught the little ones everything they knew, and the proof of that was the meanest Herdman of all was Gladys, the youngest.
We figured that they were all headed straight for trouble by way of the state penitentiary, until they got themselves mixed up with the church and our mother and our Christmas pageant.
Mother didn't expect to have anything to do with the Christmas pageant, except to make me and Charlie be in it. We didn't want to, and to make my father go and see it. He didn't want to. Every year he said the same thing.
I'm not going to the Christmas pageant.
Why not? Charlie's a shepherd this year.
Charlie was a shepherd last year. No, you go on ahead. I'm going to stay here and relax in my bathroom. There's never anything exciting about the Christmas pageant.
There's something exciting and different this year.
What?
Charlie's wearing your bathrobe.
So that year my father went. To see his bathrobe, he said. Actually, he went every year, but it was always a struggle. My mother said that was her contribution to the Christmas pageant, getting my father to go to it.
But Mother got stuck with the whole thing when Mrs. George Armstrong fell and broke her leg. Even in pain, Mrs. Armstrong could still give orders. She was so good at giving orders that she was just naturally the head of anything she belonged to. And at church she did everything but preach. Most of all, she ran the Christmas pageant every year. And here she was, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, flat on her back. Mother said,
I don't know what they'll do about the pageant.
But the pageant wasn't the only problem. Mrs. Armstrong was also chairman of the Ladies' Aid Bazaar and the coordinator of the Women's Society potluck supper. And there was a lot of telephoning back and forth to see who would take over those jobs. Mother said,
I could run the potluck supper with one hand tied behind my back. All you have to do is make sure everyone doesn't bring meatloaf. But the Christmas pageant?
Our Christmas pageant isn't what you call four-star entertainment. Mrs. Armstrong breaking her leg was the only unexpected thing that ever happened to her. The script is standard: be in the stable, the shepherd's the star, and so are the costumes, and so is the casting.
primary kids are angels, intermediate kids are shepherds, big boys are the wise men. Elmer Hopkins, the minister's son, has been Joseph for as long as I can remember. And my friend Alice Wendelkin is Mary because she's so smart, so neat and clean, and, most of all, so holy looking.
The rest of the angel choir lined up according to height because nobody can sing parts. As a matter of fact, nobody can sing. We're strictly a no-talent outfit, except for a boy named Albert Bottles, who whistles. Last year Albert whistled What Child Is This? For a change of pace, but nobody liked it, especially Mrs. Bottles, because Albert put too much into it and ran out of air and passed out cold on the manger in the middle of the third verse.
Aside from that, though, it's always just the Christmas story, year after year, with people shuffling around in bathrobes and bedsheets and sharp wings.
Of course, nobody even thought about the Herdmans in connection with the Christmas pageant. Most of us spent all week in school being pounded and poked and pushed around by the Herdmans, and we looked forward to Sunday as a real day of rest.
It was Charlie's fault that the Herdmans showed up in church. For 3 days in a row, Leroy Herdman stole the dessert from Charlie's lunchbox, and finally Charlie just gave up trying to do anything about it.
Oh, go on and take it. I don't care. I get all the dessert I want in Sunday school. What kind of dessert? Candy bars, chocolate, cookies, Kool-Aid. We get all refreshments all the time, Alvin. You're a liar. We get ice cream too. Who gives it to you? The minister.
Of course, that was the wrong thing to tell Herdmans if you wanted them to stay away. And sure enough, the very next Sunday there they were, slouching into Sunday school, eyes peeled for the refreshments.
After church the next Sunday, we all filed in the back pews. It was a terrible time to try and keep everyone quiet. Mother said,
Now this isn't going to take very long. First I'm going to tell you about the rehearsals. We'll have rehearsals on Wednesdays at 6:30. We were only going to have 5 rehearsals, so you must try to be present at every one.
Claude asked, what if we get sick? Mother answered,
You won't get sick. Now, the little children in the cradle room and primary class will be our angels. The older girls and boys will be shepherds and guests at the end and members of the choir. We need Mary and Joseph, the 3 wise men, and the angel of the Lord. They aren't hard parts, but they're very important parts. So those people must absolutely come to every rehearsal.
Claude asked, what if they get sick? Mother again answered,
They won't get sick either. Now, we all know what kind of person Mary was. She was quiet and gentle and kind, and the little girl who plays Mary should try to be that kind of person. I know many of you would like to be Mary in our pageant, but, of course, we can only have one Mary. So I'll ask for volunteers, and then we'll decide together which girl should get that part. Did you have a question, Emma Jean?
No, I want to be Mary, and Ralph wants to be Joseph.
Well, we want to be sure everyone has a chance. Does anyone else want to volunteer for Joseph? All right, Ralph will be our Joseph. Now, does anyone else want to volunteer for Mary?
Nobody volunteered to be the wise men either, except Leroy, Ollie, and Claude Herman. So there was my mother, stuck with the Christmas pageant full of Herdmans in the main rows. There was 1 Herdman left over and 1 main row left over, and you didn't have to be very smart to figure out that Gladys was going to be the angel of the Lord. She asked, What do I have to do? Mother answered,
The angel of the Lord was the one who brought the good news to the shepherds. Well, that seems to be all we need to talk about today. See you all on Wednesday.
While everyone was leaving, Mother said to Alice,
Why in the world didn't you raise your hand to be Mary?
I don't know.
But I knew. I heard Imogene Herdman telling Alice what would happen to her if she dared to volunteer. All the ordinary, everyday Herdman things, like clunking you on the head, and drawing pictures all over your homework, and putting worms in your coat pocket.
The first pageant rehearsal was usually as much fun as a 3-hour ride on the school bus, and just as noisy and crowded. This rehearsal, though, was different. Everyone shut up and settled down right away, for fear of missing something awful that the Herdmans might do. They got there 10 minutes like sliding into the room like a bunch of outlaws.
Herdman says, we're so glad to see you all. Who are the shepherds? Where do they come from? What's the inn? What's an inn? It's like a motel where people go to spend the night. Why? What happened first? Begin at the beginning.
The thing was, the Herdmans didn't know anything about the Christmas story. They knew that Christmas was Jesus' birthday, but everything else was news to them. The shepherds, the wise men, the star, the stable, the crowded inn.
It was hard to believe. At least it was hard for me to believe. Alice Wendelkin said she didn't have any trouble believing it, and how would they find out about the Christmas story anyway? They don't even know what a Bible is.
Mother said she had better begin by reading the Christmas story from the Bible. This was a pain in the neck to most of us, because we knew the whole thing backward and forward, and never had to be told anything except who we were supposed to be and where we were supposed to stand.
Christopher Mary, his espoused wife, being a great child, pregnant. Now that's enough, Ralph. I don't think it's very nice to say that Mary was pregnant. But she was. I'm not supposed to talk about people being pregnant. I better tell my mother. Tell her what? That your mother is talking about things like that in church. My mother might not want me to hear it.
I couldn't believe it. Among other things, the Herdmans were famous for never sitting still and never paying attention to anyone. Parents, teachers, the truant officer, the police. Yet they were, eyes glued on my mother and taking in every word.
Then we came to King Herod, and the Herdmans never heard of him either, so Mother had to explain that it was Herod who sent the wise men to find the baby Jesus.
I couldn't understand the Herdmans. You would have thought that the Christmas story came right out of the FBI files that got so involved in it, wanted a bloody end to Herod, worried about Mary having her baby in a barn, and called the wise men a bunch of dirty spies.
And they left the first rehearsal arguing about whether Joseph should have set fire to the inn or just chased the innkeeper into the next county.
At the next rehearsal, Mother started again to separate everyone into angels and shepherds and guests at the inn, but she didn't get very far. The Herdmans wanted to rewrite the whole pageant and hang Herod for a finish.
It wasn't just Jesus he was after, he killed all kinds of people.
He even killed his own boy, and nothing happened to him. Well, he died, didn't he? Maybe he died a horrible death. How did he die?
It didn't say. Well, I guess.
Since none of the Herdmans have ever gone to church or Sunday school or read the Bible or anything, they didn't know how things were supposed to be. Imogene, for instance, didn't know that Mary was supposed to be acted out in one certain way, sort of quiet and dreamy and out of this world. The way Imogene did it was loud and bossy.
Get away from the baby! They just want to honor him. They don't mean any harm, for heaven's sakes.
But the wise men didn't know how things were supposed to be either, and nobody blamed Imogene for shoving them out of the way. You got the feeling that these wise men were going to hustle back to Herod as fast as they could and squeal on the baby out of pure meanness. They thought about it too.
Our last rehearsal happened to be the night before the potluck supper, and when we got there, the kitchen was full of ladies in aprons, counting out dishes and silverware and making applesauce cake for the dessert. Mother said,
Now this is going to be a dress rehearsal.
Right away, 3 or 4 baby angels began hollering that they forgot their wings, and half the angel choir had forgotten their robes. Mother told them,
Don't worry about your costumes. The main point of a dress rehearsal isn't the costumes. The main point is to go straight through without stopping. And that's what we're going to do, as if we were doing it for the whole congregation. I'm going to sit in the pews and be the audience.
But it didn't work out that way. The baby angels came in at the wrong place and had to go back out again, and a whole gang of shepherds didn't come in at all for fear of Gladys. Imogene couldn't find the baby Jesus doll and wrapped up a great big memorial flower urn in the blanket, and then dropped it on Ralph's foot. And half the angel choir sang Away in a Manger, while the other half sang A Little Town of Bethlehem, so we had to start over a lot. Imogene said to the wise men, I've got the baby here. Don't touch him. I named him Jesus.
No, no, no. Now, Imogene, you know you're not supposed to say anything. No one says anything in our pageant except the angel of the Lord and the choir singing carols. Mary and Joseph and the wise men make a lovely picture for us to look at while we think about Christmas and what it means.
I guess Mother had to say things like that, even though everybody knew it was a lie. The Herdmans didn't look like anything
I thought I ought to tell him what his name is.
No, besides, you remember it wasn't Mary who named the baby.
I would have named him Bill. Neither of you named the baby. God sent an angel to tell him what the baby's name was. I told you, I named him Jesus.
What angel was that? Was it Gladys?
No, Gladys is the angel that comes to the shepherds with the good news. Yep, unto you a child is born. Now let's start again.
By that time, everyone was hot and tired, and most of the baby angels had to go to the bathroom, so Mother said we would take a 5-minute recess and then start over and go through without stopping.
Well, we never did go straight through. The 5-minute recess was a big mistake because it stretched to 15 minutes, and Imogene spent the whole time smoking cigars in the ladies' room. Then Mrs. Homer McCarthy went to the ladies' room and opened the door and smelled something funny and saw some smoke, and she ran right to the church office and called the fire department.
They were singing Angels We Have Heard on High when they heard the fire engine as it was pulling up on the church lawn and saw red lights flashing. The firemen hurried in and made us all go outside, and then they dragged a big hose in the front door and went looking for the fire to put out.
The street was full of baby angels crying and shepherds climbing all over the fire truck, and the firemen and all the ladies on the potluck committee and neighbors came to see what was going on.
Reverend Hopkins said, the whole church is in an uproar. Do you think we should call off the pageant? But Mother answered,
Certainly not. Why, this is going to be the best Christmas pageant we've ever had.
On the night of the pageant, we didn't have any supper because Mother forgot to fix it. My father said that was all right. With all the excitement the Herdmans had been causing, he didn't expect supper anymore. Father said, when it's all over, we'll go someplace and have hamburgers. Mother replied,
When this is all over, I might have to go someplace and hide. I don't know what's going to happen. We've never gone straight through the whole thing. It might be the first Christmas pageant in history where Joseph and the wise men get in a fight and Mary runs off with the baby.
Everything settled down, and at 7:30 the pageant began. We sang Away in the Manger. The ushers lit candles all around the church, so you really had to know the words to Away in the Manger, because you couldn't see anything. After that, we sang 2 verses of A Little Town of Bethlehem, and then we were supposed to hum some more of the song while Mary and Joseph came in from the side door. Only they didn't come in right away, so we hummed and hummed and hummed, which is boring and also very hard, and before long, doesn't sound like any song at all, more like an old refrigerator. Alice said she knew something like this would happen. They didn't come at all, so won't have any Mary and Joseph, and now what are we supposed to do? I guess we would have gone on humming until we all turned blue, but we didn't have to. Ralph and Imogene were there all right, but only for once they didn't come through the door pushing each other out of the way. They just stood there for a minute, as if they weren't sure they were in the right place, because of the candles, I guess, and the church being full of people. They looked like the people you see on the 6 o'clock news, refugees, sent to wait in some strange, ugly place, with all their boxes and sacks around them.
It suddenly occurred to me that this was just the way it must have been for the real Holy Family, stuck away in a barn by people who didn't much care what happened with them. They couldn't have been very neat and tidy either, but more like this Mary and Joseph. Imogene had the baby doll, but she wasn't carrying it the way she was supposed to, cradled in her arms. She had slung it over her shoulder, and before she put it in the manger, she thumped it twice on the back.
Came the shepherds. Then came Gladys, pushing people out of the way and stepping on everyone's feet. Since Gladys was the only one in the pageant who had anything to say, she made the most of it.
Hey, I'm doing transport!
We sang about the angels and then about the wise men, as everyone watched as they came up the aisle. Alice asked,
What have they got?
I didn't know, but whatever it was heavy. Leroy almost dropped it. They didn't give the jars they were supposed to carry. Alice said,
I knew this would happen. I bet it's something awful, like a burnt offering.
Well, they did burn things, but they hadn't burned this yet. It was a turkey, and right away I knew where it came from. My father was on the church charitable works committee. They give away food baskets at Christmas, and this was the herdman's food basket turkey. It still had the ribbon around it saying Merry Christmas. Alice exclaimed,
I bet they stole that.
They did not. It came from their food baskets, and if they want to give away their own turkey, I guess they can do it. Even if the herdmans didn't like turkey, they had never given anything away before in their lives, except lumps on the head, so you have to be impressed.
Leroy dropped the turkey in front of the manger. It looked funny to see a turkey there instead of the fancy bath salts jars we always used for the myrrh and the frankincense. And then they went and sat down. While we sang, What Child Is This?, the wise men were supposed to confer among themselves and leave by a different door, so everybody would understand that they were going home another way. But the herdmans forgot, or didn't want to, or something, because they didn't confer and they didn't leave either. They just sat there, and there wasn't anything anyone could do about it. Alice exclaimed,
They're ruining the whole thing.
They're supposed to have come a long ways. You wouldn't expect them to just show up, hand over the turkey, and leave. As for ruining the whole thing, it seems to me the herdmans had improved the pageant a lot, just by doing things that come naturally, like burping the baby or thinking that a turkey would make a better present than a lot of perfumed oil.
Usually, by the time we got to Silent Night, which was always the last carol, I was fed up with the whole thing and couldn't wait for it to be over. But I didn't feel that way this time. I almost wished for the pageant to go on, with the herdmans in charge, to see what else they would do that was different.
Maybe the wise men would tell Mary about their problem with Herod, and she would tell them to go back and lie their heads off. Or Joseph might go with them and get rid of Herod once and for all. Or Joseph and Mary might ask the wise men to take the Christ child with them, figuring that no one would think to look there. I was so busy planning new ways to save the baby Jesus that I missed the beginning of Silent Night. But it was all right, because everyone sang it, including the audience. We sang all the verses, too. When we got to Son of God Loves Pure Light, I happened to look at Imogene, and I almost dropped my hymn book. Everyone had been waiting all this time for the herdmans to do something absolutely unexpected. And sure enough, that what happened. Imogene Herdman was crying. In the candlelight, her face was all shiny with tears, and she didn't even bother to wipe them away. She just sat there, awful old Imogene, in her crookedy veil, crying and crying and crying.
Well, it was the best Christmas pageant we ever had. Everybody said so, but nobody seemed to know why. When it was over, people stood around the lobby of the church talking about what was different this year. There was something special, everyone said, but they couldn't put their finger on it. And this was the funny thing about it all. For years, I'd thought about the wonder of Christmas and the mystery of Jesus' birth, and never really understood it. But now, because of the herdmans, it didn't seem so mysterious after all.
When Imogene had asked me what the pageant was about, I told her it was about Jesus, but that was just part of it. It was about a new baby and his mother and father who were in a lot of trouble. No money, no place to go, no doctor, nobody they knew. And then, arriving from the east, like my uncle from New Jersey, some rich friends. But Imogene, I guess, didn't see it that way. Christmas just came over all at once, like a case of chills and fever, and so she was crying and walking into furniture. Afterward, we put everything away.
It meant that no matter how she herself was, Imogene liked the idea of the Mary in the picture, all pink and white and pure looking, as if she never washed the dishes or cooked supper or did anything at all except to have Jesus on Christmas Eve.
But as far as I'm concerned, Mary is always going to look a lot like Imogene Herdman, sort of nervous and bewildered, but ready to clubber anyone who laid a hand on her baby. And the wise men are always going to be Leroy and his brothers bearing turkey.
When we came out of the church that night, it was cold and clear, with crunchy snow underfoot and bright, bright stars overhead.